The mist came first, as it always did. Father Thomas Carvalho had heard the stories his entire life, whispered in the stone churches and around winter fires throughout the Beira interior. Every 10 years, when autumn balanced on the edge of winter, the mountain appeared. Not a new mountain, nothing so simple as that. It had always been there, the old ones said, but sleeping, hidden behind a veil that only thinned once each decade for exactly 3 weeks, before closing again like an eye growing tired of the world. His grandmother had seen it in 1747. She'd been a girl then, tending sheep in the high pastures near Monsanto, when the fog rolled down from nowhere and parted to reveal slopes that shouldn't exist. She'd run home so fast she'd torn her feet bloody on the stones, and for the rest of her life she would wake screaming from dreams of faces in the rocks, watching her with eyes that had forgotten what it meant to blink. It was October 1777, and the mountain was waking again. Tomás stood at the edge of Vila Pequena, a village so small it appeared on no maps, watching the impossible fog bank advance across the valley. He was 34 years old, thin and weathered from years of ministering to the scattered communities of this harsh region. His cassock was patched and faded, his hands calloused from work that went far beyond the spiritual. Here, a priest was also a physician, a teacher, an arbitrator of disputes, and sometimes, when the wolves grew bold, a hunter. "Father, you shouldn't be out here." Tomás turned to find Antonio, the village's eldest shepherd, leaning heavily on his crook. The old man's face was a geography of wrinkles, each line a story of 70 winters survived in these unforgiving highlands. "I need to see it, Antonio. I need to understand." The shepherd spat into the dust. "There's nothing to understand. It comes, people disappear, it goes. Same as there's always been, same as it'll be when we're both bones. How many disappeared last time, in 1767? Antonio's eyes grew distant. "I was with them, Father. My brother Joan, my cousin Maria, and her husband. 4 of us went up when the mountain called. Only I came back." He tapped his temple with a gnarled finger. "But not all of me came back, if you understand my meaning. Some things I left up there. Some things it kept." "What did you see?" The old man's lips pressed into a thin line. "Dreams that don't end when you wake. Doors in the rocks that open onto places that hurt to look at. And the others." He paused, his breath coming in short gasps. "The others who went up before, from times so old their names are forgotten, still walking those slopes, Father, still trying to find their way down." Tomás felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Antonio, I must ask, does the mountain take people, or do they choose to go?" The shepherd's laugh was bitter as winter herbs. "You think there's a difference? When it calls, Father, you'll understand. It doesn't grab you. It doesn't need to. It makes you want to come. It shows you things, memories you'd forgotten, people you've lost, futures that might have been. And you walk toward them, knowing in your heart it's wrong, but unable to stop your feet." The fog had reached the first buildings now, tendrils of vapor curling around the stone foundations like curious fingers. In its depths, Tomás thought he could see shapes moving, tall and wrong, their proportions subtly off, in ways that made his eyes water when he tried to focus on them. "Get inside, Father," Antonio urged, pulling at his sleeve. "The first night is the worst. That's when it takes stock of us, counts us, decides who it wants." But Tomás remained rooted, watching as the impossible mist swallowed Villa Pequena whole. Within it, the world transformed. The familiar paths between houses stretched and twisted. The church bell tower, which he could normally see from any point in the village, vanished entirely, and rising behind it all, where no mountain had stood just hours before, a peak thrust upward into the darkening sky. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The angles of its slopes defied perspective. Shadows fell in directions that had nothing to do with the setting sun. And carved into its face, visible even from this distance, were symbols that seemed to writhe when viewed directly. Ancient marks that predated Latin, predated even the Celtic peoples who had first settled these lands. "Mother of God," Thomas whispered, crossing himself. "She doesn't hear you here," Antonio said softly. "Not while the mountain listens. It's older than her, Father. Older than him. Older than the names we use to keep the darkness at bay." The village huddled against the fog like a child hiding under blankets. Thomas moved through the narrow streets, noting how the families had shuttered their windows and barred their doors. No lights showed. No one spoke above a whisper. It was as if Villa Pequena had decided that by becoming small and quiet enough, it might be overlooked entirely. He found his way to the church by memory, his hand trailing along the stone walls. The building was centuries old, its foundation stones laid by monks who had pushed into these wilderness regions, carrying the cross and the sword. Inside, candles guttered in the draught, their light barely touching the darkness that pressed against the windows. Luisa Ferreira knelt before the altar, her lips moving in silent prayer. She was 43, a widow who had lost her husband to the mountain in 1767. When she heard Tomas's footsteps, she didn't turn. "It's taken Paulo," she said, her voice flat. Tomas's stomach tightened. Paulo was her son, just 17. "When?" "An hour ago. He said he heard his father calling. I tried to stop him, but—" She finally turned, and her eyes were dry, burned out by too much grief. "He walked right into the fog, Father, smiling, like he was going to a festa." "I'll find him," Thomas heard himself say. "No one who goes up comes back," Luisa said. "Not really. Antonio seems whole, but at night I hear him talking to people who aren't there. And old Rosa, she went up in 1747 and came back, but she aged 40 years in 3 weeks, dead before Christmas, and raving about doors and faces the whole time." Tomas moved to the window, looking out at the fog-shrouded street. "Why does it come here? There are hundreds of villages in Portugal. Why Villa Pequena?" "This is where it's always been," came a voice from the shadows. Tomas turned to find Father Sebastian emerging from the vestry. The old priest was 90 if he was a day, bent nearly double with age, but his eyes were sharp as broken glass. He'd been Tomas's predecessor, supposedly retired, but he'd never left the village. Now Tomas understood why. "You've seen it before," Tomas said. 1747, 1757, 1767. Sebastian counted off on twisted fingers. 3 times I've watched it rise. 3 times I've buried the ones who came back wrong and said masses for the ones who didn't come back at all. Why didn't you tell me?" The old priest's laugh was like wind through a tomb. "Would you have believed me? Would you have come here if you'd known? The bishop sends young priests to Villa Pequena because no one else will come. This place, it eats faith, chews it up and spits out the bones. Then why do you stay?" Sebastian moved closer, and in the candlelight his face seemed to shift and waver, as if Tomas were seeing multiple versions of him layered atop each other. Because someone has to witness. Someone has to remember when the mountain finishes its feeding and goes back to sleep. The people here, they try to forget. They tell themselves it's madness, superstition, old women's tales. But I remember. I write it down. He gestured to the vestry. Every disappearance, every transformation, every impossible thing. Tomas followed him into the small room. The walls were lined with journals, hundreds of them, their leather covers cracked with age. Sebastian pulled one down at random and opened it. The pages were covered in dense script, but interspersed throughout were drawings, crude but effective. Tomas saw sketches of the mountain from different angles, each version subtly different, as if the artist couldn't quite remember what they'd seen. There were drawings of people too, but their features were blurred, overwritten with other faces, as if each person contained multitudes. The mountain doesn't just take people, Sebastian explained. It takes time. It shows you what was, what is, what might be, past and future bleeding into each other like watercolors in the rain. The people who go up, they get lost in that. They see themselves as children, as old people, as corpses. They see their ancestors and descendants. They see versions of themselves that made different choices. And they can't find their way back to now. A sound outside made them both freeze, a voice calling softly through the fog. Tomas. Father Tomas. He knew that voice. It belonged to his sister Clara, who had died of fever 12 years ago in Coimbra, 200 kilometers away. Don't listen, Sebastian hissed, gripping his arm with surprising strength. But Tomas was already moving toward the door. He couldn't help it. The voice was so clear, so real. Clara had been 21 when she died, full of life and laughter. She'd planned to marry a merchant's son. She'd wanted to see Lisbon, to travel, to live. Tomas, it's cold out here. Please let me in. His hand touched the door handle. Through the narrow window, he could see a figure in the fog, slight, feminine, wrapped in a familiar blue shawl. She was exactly as he remembered her, down to the way she tucked her hair behind her left ear. It's not her, Sebastian said from behind him. It's never them. It just wears their faces. But what if it is? What if the mountain can what? Raise the dead? Reverse time? The old priest's voice was hard. Even if it could, would that be Clara? Or just something shaped like her, filled with the mountain's hunger? The figure outside pressed its face against the window. In the candlelight, Clara's features seemed to shift, becoming someone else, then back again. Her mouth opened, and her voice continued, but now Tomas could hear other voices layered beneath it. Dozens, hundreds, all calling names, all begging to be let in. He released the door handle and stepped back. The thing outside tilted its head, its smile growing wider than any human smile should. Then it straightened and walked away, dissolving into the fog as if it had never been. You'll hear many voices these next 3 weeks, Sebastian said quietly. The mountain has been listening to this village for centuries. It knows every grief, every regret, every secret longing, and it will use them all. Tomas didn't sleep that night. He sat in the church, reading through Sebastian's journals by candlelight, and with each page, his understanding of his situation grew more dire. The entries went back further than he'd thought. Not just decades, but centuries. The handwriting changed, Sebastian's precise script giving way to older, more elaborate hands. Some entries were in Latin, others in Portuguese, so archaic he could barely decipher it. And the oldest ones, crumbling pages carefully preserved between wax paper, were in languages he didn't recognize at all. But the content remained consistent. Every 10 years, the mountain appeared. Every 10 years, people vanished or returned changed. And every 10 years, the priest of Villa Pequena recorded what happened, adding their testimony to this impossible archive. One entry from 1687 caught his attention. The mountain is not a place but a memory. It remembers what was here before the church, before Rome, before even the first men. It remembers when the earth was young and the boundaries between worlds were thin as spider silk. Every 10 years it wakes and remembers, and for 3 weeks it makes the world remember too. We become unstuck in time, and the mountain feeds on that confusion. It takes those who cannot find their way back to the present and adds them to its collection. I have seen them in my dreams, all the lost ones walking its impossible slopes, searching for doors that lead home. They have been searching for centuries. They will search forever. Thunder rolled across the valley, though the sky had been clear. Tomas looked up from the journal to find Father Sebastião standing in the doorway, silhouetted against a darkness that seemed deeper than mere night. "It's beginning," the old priest said. They stepped outside together. The fog had lifted slightly, and now the mountain was clearly visible, rising impossibly above the village. And on its slopes, lights were moving, hundreds of them, flickering like candles as they traced ancient paths up toward the summit. "The dreamers," Sebastião whispered. "All the people taken over the centuries. Every night they walk, trying to find their way down. But the paths always lead up, always toward the peak." Tomas strained his eyes. The lights were people, he realized. Human figures carrying torches or lanterns, climbing in single file along trails that appeared and disappeared like afterthoughts. Even from this distance, something about their movement seemed wrong. They walked with the jerky, uncertain gait of sleepwalkers, or of people who had forgotten how their own bodies worked. Can they see us? They see everything and nothing. They're trapped between moments, between heartbeats. To them, we might appear as ghosts, flickering in and out of existence, just as they appear to us. As Tomas watched, one of the figures stopped and turned to look directly at him. Distance should have made it impossible to see details, but somehow he could perceive the figure with terrible clarity. It was a woman, dressed in clothes from another century, her face slack and dreamlike. Her mouth opened, and though no sound reached him, he knew she was calling for help. Then she turned back to the path and continued climbing. "How many?" Tomas asked. "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. The mountain has been collecting for a very long time." Sebastião's voice was heavy with sorrow. "And in 10 years, Paulo will be among them, and anyone else taken this cycle, walking forever, dreaming of home. There has to be a way to free them. Many have tried, none have succeeded." The old priest pointed to a section of the mountain's base, where the rock face seemed to shimmer like water. "There are doors, if you know how to see them, entrances to the mountain's heart, but everyone who's gone in has either never come out or come out too changed to tell what they found." "But you've been studying this for 70 years. And in 70 years, I've learned only that the mountain is patient and we are not. It can afford to wait. We cannot. Sebastian turned to him, and in his ancient eyes, Thomas saw something that might have been hope or might have been madness. But perhaps you're different. You're young. Your faith is still strong. Maybe the mountain hasn't learned your weaknesses yet. What are you suggesting? That you do what I was too afraid to do. That you go up into the mountain, not to be taken, but to understand, to see its heart and learn how it feeds, and maybe, just maybe, to find a way to make it stop. Thomas looked at the impossible peak, at the dreamers walking its slopes, at the shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was madness, that no good could come from accepting this mission. But he thought of Paolo, just 17, walking into the fog with a smile. He thought of all the others taken over the centuries, all the families destroyed, all the grief accumulated like snow drifting against a wall. When? He asked. Tomorrow night. The mountain will be stronger, more present. The doors will open wider. And you, Sebastian placed a hand on his shoulder. You will need to be ready to see things that will test your faith to its breaking point. The next day, Villa Pequena moved in a strange, subdued manner, like a town underwater. People emerged from their homes only when necessary, hurrying through their tasks before retreating back inside. They didn't speak of the mountain, didn't even look at it, as if ignoring it might make it less real. But the mountain could not be ignored. It dominated the landscape, imposing its presence on every sightline, every thought. And as the day wore on, more people began to disappear. First was Maria Santos, a girl of 19 who walked out of her family's home at dawn and headed straight for the mountain path. Her mother's screams brought half the village running, but by the time they reached the edge of the fog, Maria had vanished completely. Then Gaspar, the blacksmith's apprentice, whose dead wife called to him from the mist. He lasted until noon, his master watching him grow more and more agitated before he finally broke, running into the fog while crying her name. By evening, 6 people were gone. Thomas spent the day preparing. He gathered candles and flint, a knife, bread and cheese wrapped in cloth. He filled a water skin from the church well and blessed it, though he wasn't sure if holy water would mean anything to whatever he might face. Finally, he sat down with Sebastian to study the oldest journals, learning what the ancient priests had discovered about the mountain's nature. It's not evil, Sebastian explained as they pored over a journal from 1437. Not in the way the church defines evil. It's more like a wound in the world, a place where time broke and never healed properly. The mountain exists in all moments at once. When you're on its slopes, you might see the same location in different centuries simultaneously. You might see yourself as a child and as an old man in the same glance. How do I navigate something like that? Intention, focus, hold tight to your sense of now. Remember who you are when you are. The moment you start doubting that, the moment you wonder if maybe you're really living in some other time, the mountain has you. He showed Tomasz a map drawn centuries ago, showing the mountain's interior structure, or what the artist had believed it to be. It was less a mountain than a labyrinth, with passages that looped back on themselves, chambers that existed in multiple locations at once, and at the center, something the artist had simply labeled O Coração, the heart. What's at the heart? Sebastian shook his head. No one who's reached it has come back to tell us. But that's where you need to go. That's where the mountain remembers. If there's a way to break its hold on this place, it'll be there. As night fell, they prepared the church for Tomas's departure. Sebastian lit candles in a specific pattern, ancient and pre-Christian, symbols that might offer some protection against the mountain's influence. He gave Tomas a crucifix carved from rowan wood and a leather pouch containing salt, iron filings, and herbs, whose names he spoke only in whispers. One more thing, the old priest said. He produced a small journal, its pages blank. Write down everything you see, everything you experience. If you don't come back, maybe the next one who tries will learn from your account. Encouraging, Tomas said dryly. I'm long past offering false comfort. Sebastian gripped his hand. You're braver than I was, braver than any of us. May that be enough. They stood at the church door, looking out at the mountain. The dreamers were visible again, their lights tracing patterns across the slopes. And at the base, where Sebastian had pointed the night before, a door had appeared in the rock face, an archway carved with symbols that seemed to shift and flow like living things. It knows you're coming, Sebastian said softly. It's waiting. Tomas took a deep breath, crossed himself, and stepped out into the fog. The world immediately became muffled, sounds reaching him as if through thick cloth. The familiar paths of Vila Pequena stretched and warped, streets becoming longer, houses seeming to repeat themselves. He kept his eyes on the mountain, using it as an anchor point, and began to climb. The slope was steeper than it looked, the ground treacherous. Stones shifted under his feet, and more than once he had to grab at scrub brush to keep from sliding backward. But slowly, steadily, he made his way toward the door. As he climbed, he became aware of presences around him, figures moving through the fog just beyond clear sight. Sometimes they seemed to be other villagers, people he recognized, but when he looked directly at them, they were strangers, dressed in the fashions of other eras. They climbed alongside him, neither helping nor hindering, lost in their own dream-like journeys. One figure resolved out of the mist, an old man in monk's robes, the fabric rotted and stained. He walked past Tomas without seeming to see him, muttering in Latin. As he passed, Tomas caught fragments. In the year of our Lord 1134, must record, the mountain wakes. God forgive us. The monk had been climbing for 600 years. The realization struck Tomas like a physical blow. These weren't ghosts or visions. They were real people, or what remained of them, trapped in an eternal moment, repeating their final journey over and over. He wanted to call out, to try to help them, but Sebastian's words echoed in his mind. Hold tight to your sense of now. Remember who you are, when you are. He forced himself to keep climbing. The door grew larger as he approached, its carved symbols now clearly visible. They depicted scenes, people climbing a mountain, people entering doorways, people transforming into shapes that hurt to look at. And at the top of the archway, a single symbol that seemed to contain all the others, a mark that suggested infinity and ending simultaneously. Tomas paused at the threshold. The darkness beyond the door was absolute, an absence of light so complete it seemed to have weight. From within came sounds, wind that might have been breathing, creaking that might have been footsteps, and underneath it all, a sound like countless voices whispering in languages both ancient and yet to be born. He thought of turning back, returning to the church, to safety, to the simple life of a village priest. No one would blame him. No one could expect him to face this. But then, he thought of Polo walking into the fog with that dreaming smile, of Maria and Gaspar and all the others, of his sister Clara's face at the window, twisted into something else's mask. Someone had to go. Someone had to try. Father Thomas Carvalho stepped through the door into the mountain's heart, and the darkness swallowed him whole. Behind him, the door began to close, but it didn't close completely. A sliver of wan light remained, a crack between worlds, as if the mountain itself was curious about what he might discover. In Vila Pequena, Father Sebastian watched from the church steps, marking the time of Tomas's entry in his journal. Around him, the fog began to thicken, and in its depths, new figures appeared, wearing Tomas's face, walking toward homes they would never reach, calling names they half remembered. The mountain was dreaming of the priest, and in those dreams it showed him versions of himself. The Tomas who had turned back, who had stayed safe, who had let others face the mountain's hunger. It showed him every choice he might have made, every life he could have lived. But in the darkness beyond the door, the Real Tomas walked on, deeper into the mountain's memory, toward a heart that had been beating since before the world learned how to forget. Inside the mountain, time had no meaning. Father Tomas stood in a corridor carved from living rock, lit by a phosphorescence that emanated from the stone itself. A cold, blue-green glow that made shadows behave strangely, bending at wrong angles and stretching in directions that defied geometry. The passage extended before and behind him, identical in both directions, with no indication of which way he had entered. He pulled out the small journal Sebastian had given him and tried to write, but his hand trembled so badly that the words came out as jagged scratches. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to center himself in the present moment. Entered the mountain at approximately 8 p.m., October 15th, 1777. The door closed behind me. I'm in a corridor of smooth stone. The air is cold, but not freezing. There is a smell, not unpleasant exactly, but wrong, like old paper and copper and something organic I cannot name. As he wrote, he became aware of sounds, footsteps echoing from somewhere deeper in the mountain. Multiple sets moving at different rhythms, some fast, some slow, some in patterns that made no sense at all. Then voices, faint and distorted. Lost, we're lost, been walking for days. Year is 1523, month of May. We entered seeking shelter from the storm. Father Rodrigo, if you can hear this, the mountain is not what we thought. The voices overlapped, creating a discordant chorus of confusion and terror that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Tomas pressed his hand against the stone and jerked back immediately. It was warm, and beneath the surface, he could feel something like a pulse. The mountain was alive. He chose a direction at random and began to walk. After what felt like an hour, but might have been minutes, the corridor branched. 3 paths stretched before him, each identical to the last. But carved above each archway was a symbol, different variations of the same mark he'd seen on the main door. The leftmost passage showed the symbol upside down. The middle passage showed it fractured, split into pieces. The rightmost showed it enclosed in a circle. Thomas studied them, trying to remember if Sebastian's journals had mentioned anything about symbols and navigation. But the more he stared, the more the marks seemed to shift and flow, their meanings changing moment to moment. A sound behind him made him spin around. A figure stood at the far end of the corridor, a young woman in a dress from decades past, her hair hanging limp around her face. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at him with eyes that reflected the phosphorescent light like an animal's. "Hello?" Tomas called. His voice echoed strangely, coming back to him in fragments. "Lo, lo, lo." The figure tilted its head. Then it began to walk toward him, its movements jerky and wrong, as if it had forgotten how joints were supposed to bend. Tomas backed away, choosing the middle passage at random, and hurried down it. Behind him, he heard the footsteps following, faster now, accompanied by a sound like weeping or laughter. He couldn't tell which. The passage twisted and turned, opening into a chamber so vast its ceiling disappeared into darkness. The walls were covered in carvings, thousands of them, depicting scenes from countless lives. Tomas saw families gathered around fires, soldiers marching to war, children playing in streets, old people dying in beds. Each carving was exquisitely detailed, and as he watched, they seemed to move slightly, the figures shifting position when he wasn't looking directly at them. In the center of the chamber stood a pool of water so still it looked like black glass, and reflected in its surface was not the chamber's ceiling, but a sky, the sky above Villa Pequena, complete with clouds and stars. As Tomas approached, he realized he could see through the surface as if looking down from a great height. There was the village, rendered in miniature but perfect in every detail. He could see the church, the houses, even individual people moving through the streets. He saw Sebastião standing outside the church, looking up at the mountain. He saw Luisa Ferreira weeping in her home, holding her son's empty coat. And he saw Antonio the shepherd standing at the edge of the village, talking to someone who wasn't there, someone who looked exactly like Tomas himself. "It's showing you what happens while you're gone," a voice said. Tomas wheeled around to find a man standing at the chamber's edge, middle-aged, dressed in the simple clothes of a farmer, but with eyes that held centuries of exhaustion. Unlike the jerky figure in the corridor, this man moved naturally, human. "Who are you?" Tomas demanded. "Juan Ferreira. I came up in 1767, looking for my father who came up in 1757. I'm still looking." He laughed bitterly. "Or maybe I found him and didn't recognize him. Everyone here forgets eventually, forgets their names, their times, their reasons for climbing. All that's left is the walking." "You're Paulo's uncle, his father's brother." João's face twisted with an emotion that might have been hope or pain. "Paulo? Yes, young Paulo. Is he still down there, still safe?" Tomas hesitated, then shook his head. "He came up yesterday. The mountain called to him." The hope in Juan's eyes died. "Then he's here somewhere, walking, forgetting, just like the rest of us." He moved closer, and Tomas could see that his clothing, while it looked solid from a distance, was actually translucent in places, as if João was slowly fading. "10 years I've been here, father, 10 years, but I've lived centuries. I've seen this chamber in summer and winter, in spring and fall. I've seen it in centuries past and centuries yet to come. The mountain shows you everything, all, times at once, until you can't remember which time is yours." "How do I reach the heart?" Tomas asked. "How do I stop this?" João shook his head slowly. "You can't stop it. The mountain doesn't have a beginning or an end. It just is. It's always been here, Father, since before Portugal, before Rome, before even the first men. This land remembers when the world was young, and the mountain is that memory given form. But there must be something at its center, some source of its power. There is. João pointed to another passage leading out of the chamber, smaller than the others, its entrance carved with symbols that seemed to writhe like living things. Through there, down and down and down, but farther. Everyone who's gone deeper has come back less human. If they come back at all, I have to try. Why? The question was simple, genuinely curious. Your people have lived with the mountain for centuries. They survive, they rebuild. What's a few lost every 10 years against the endless march of time? The mountain will outlast us all. Why fight it? Tomás thought of Paulo's smile as he walked into the fog, of Clara's face at the window, of all the lights on the mountain slopes, thousands of people trapped in an eternal present, forever climbing, forever searching. Because even if I can't stop it, he said quietly, I can bear witness, I can understand, and understanding is the first step toward hope. João studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, then go. And when you forget who you are, because you will, Father, everyone does, try to remember that you were brave, that you chose this. That matters, even if nothing else does. The farmer, or what remained of him, turned and walked away, dissolving into the chamber's shadows, until Tomás couldn't be sure he'd been there at all. The passage João had indicated descended steeply, the phosphorescent light growing dimmer, until Tomás had to feel his way along the walls. The stone here was different, warmer, softer, almost organic. In places, it seemed to pulse beneath his fingers, and he could hear something beyond the walls. Heartbeats, countless heartbeats, none of them synchronized, creating a rhythm that was almost music, but wrong in fundamental ways. He lost track of how long he walked. His legs ached, his throat was dry despite the water he'd brought, and he was hungry in a way that went beyond physical need, a spiritual hunger, as if the mountain was slowly consuming some essential part of him. Finally, the passage opened into another chamber, and Tomás stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The walls were lined with alcoves, thousands of them stretching up into darkness and down into depths he couldn't see. And in each alcove stood a figure, perfectly still, perfectly preserved, like statues in a church. But these weren't statues. They were people trapped in poses of everyday life. A woman churning butter, a man sharpening a blade, children playing a game with stones, an old woman spinning thread. They didn't move, didn't breathe, but Tomás could sense that they weren't dead. They were suspended, caught between moments, living the same second over and over for eternity. As he moved through the chamber, he began to recognize some of them. There. That was old Rosa, whom Luisa had mentioned, the woman who'd returned from the mountain in 1747, aged 40 years. But here she was young, perhaps 20, frozen in the act of braiding her hair. And there, near the bottom, was a monk whose face matched the one Tomás had seen climbing in the fog. The one who'd been walking since 1134. The mountain was collecting them. Every person it had ever taken, preserved here like specimens in a natural philosopher's collection. It's beautiful in its way. Tomás turned to find another figure standing in the chamber, this one translucent, flickering like a candle flame. The woman was ancient, dressed in robes that predated even Rome, with markings on her skin that might have been tattoos or scars. Beautiful, Thomas managed. This is horror. These people are trapped. Are they? The woman drifted closer, and as she moved, Thomas could see through her to the alcoves beyond. They aren't suffering. They're preserved in their happiest moments, their most contented seconds. The woman churning butter. She's thinking of her daughter's wedding, how proud she is. The man with the blade. He's remembering a song his mother taught him. They're frozen in joy, Father. Is that truly horror? They have no choice, no freedom. And what is freedom but the ability to suffer, to age, to die? The mountain offers something else, eternity without pain, memory without loss. Every person here exists in their perfect moment forever. The woman's form flickered, becoming more solid for an instant. I was the first, the first to enter willingly. That was 3,000 years ago. 4. Time means nothing here. I was a priestess of the old ways, before your Christ, before even the gods whose names I spoke. I found the mountain when it woke, and I understood what it was. A wound in time, yes, but also a mercy, a place where nothing ever has to end. Who are you? I don't remember anymore. Names are for people who exist in time. I'm beyond that now. I'm part of the mountain, or it's part of me. We've become something new together. She gestured to the alcoves. These people, they didn't fade because they were trapped. They faded because they let go, stopped fighting, accepted the gift of an eternal present. And one day, you'll stop fighting too. Never, Thomas said, but the word came out weaker than he'd intended. The woman smiled sadly. They all say that. But the mountain is patient. It has nothing but time. She began to fade, her voice becoming an echo. The heart is deeper still, Father. 3 more chambers, 3 more truths. But with each step, you'll leave more of yourself behind. By the time you reach it, will there be enough of you left to understand what you find? She vanished completely, leaving Thomas alone in the gallery of frozen lives. He forced himself to move forward, past the alcoves, trying not to look at the faces. But one caught his attention, a young man, perhaps 16, frozen in the act of laughing. The resemblance to Paulo was unmistakable. This was his ancestor, taken decades or centuries ago, and the family resemblance had echoed down through the generations. How many families had given the mountain their sons and daughters over the millennia? How many bloodlines were represented in these alcoves, stretching back to the dawn of human settlement in these hills? The chamber's far exit was different from the others. Not a simple archway, but a door of dark wood, bound with iron, symbols carved so deeply into its surface that they cast their own shadows. Thomas pushed it open, the hinges silent despite their obvious age, and stepped through. The door closed behind him with a sound like finality, and Thomas found himself in a circular chamber, perhaps 30 feet across. The walls were mirrors, or something like mirrors. They reflected not just his image, but countless versions of himself, each one slightly different. In one reflection he was older, his face lined with age. In another, he was younger, barely more than a boy. In a third, he wore bishop's robes. In a fourth, he was dressed as a soldier. Each reflection moved independently, living out different moments from different lives. He watched himself as an old man saying Mass in a grand cathedral. He watched himself as a young soldier dying on a battlefield, blood pooling beneath him. He watched himself as a father, holding a child who had his eyes. He watched himself as a hermit, living alone in caves, half mad with isolation, all the lives he might have lived, all the choices he might have made, displayed like paintings in a gallery. "This is the chamber of reflections," a voice said. Tomas turned to find another figure, but this one was himself, exactly as he was now, down to the dirt on his cassock and the exhaustion in his eyes. The double smiled. "Or one of us said that, or will say it. Time doesn't work right here." "You're not real," Tomas said. "I'm exactly as real as you are. More real, maybe. I'm the you who turned back at the first chamber, who decided this was too much, who went home to Villa Pequena and spent the rest of his life wondering what might have been." The double moved closer. "Or maybe I'm the you who never came up at all, who stayed in the church when Paulo went missing, who chose safety over courage. There are so many versions of you, Father. So many choices you made or didn't make. The mountain shows them all." More doubles appeared, stepping out of the mirrors. A dozen Tomases, then 100, each one slightly different, each one representing a different path, a different life. They surrounded him, and he couldn't tell which one was the original, which one was real. "Stop," he said, closing his eyes. "This isn't real. I'm Father Tomas Carvalho. I was born in Coimbra in 1743. I entered the priesthood at 20. I came to Villa Pequena 3 years ago. I am here now in this moment. These other versions, they're possibilities, not realities." "But what makes one possibility more real than another?" his doubles asked in unison. "You chose to come here, but you might have chosen otherwise. In the space of that choice, all versions exist simultaneously. The mountain simply shows you what your eyes normally hide." Tomas kept his eyes closed, focusing on his breathing, on the weight of his body, on the feel of stone beneath his feet. Sebastian's words echoed in his mind. "Hold tight to your sense of now. Remember who you are when you are." "I am here," he said firmly. "The other versions aren't. They're shadows, possibilities, might-have-beens. But I'm real because I am present. I am now." The voices of his doubles grew louder, more insistent, overlapping until they became a roar of confusion. But Tomas held firm, centering himself in the present moment, refusing to acknowledge any reality but the one he inhabited. Gradually, the voices faded. When he opened his eyes, the doubles were gone, dissolved back into the mirrors. Only one reflection remained, his own, exactly as it should be, exhausted and afraid, but still himself. A new passage had appeared in the chamber's far wall, smaller and narrower than the others, descending at a steep angle. Stone steps, worn smooth by countless feet over countless centuries, led down into deeper darkness. Tomas pulled out his journal and made a note with trembling hands. "Third chamber. The mountain shows you all your possible selves, trying to make you forget which one is real, must maintain sense of present self, of now, moving deeper. I estimate I've been inside for 4 hours, though it feels both longer and shorter. My supplies are holding. My faith is uncertain. But I continue." He started down the stairs. The descent seemed endless. Tomas counted 500 steps, then lost count, then started over twice. The air grew warmer and more humid, and the stone walls began to weep moisture that collected in channels carved into the steps. The water glowed faintly, with the same phosphorescence as the walls, creating the illusion that he was descending into a living thing's throat. The stairs finally opened into a chamber unlike any he'd seen so far. It was shaped like an amphitheater. with tiers of stone seats rising up the walls. But instead of a stage at the center, there was a pit, circular, perhaps 20 feet across, dropping down into darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow even the phosphorescent light. And around the pit's edge, carved into the stone floor, were thousands of names. Tomas knelt to read them, running his fingers over letters worn almost smooth by time. Some were in Portuguese, others in Latin, still others in languages he couldn't identify. Each name was accompanied by a date: 1777, 1767, 1757, stretching back through the centuries. 1134, 891, 432. These were all the people the mountain had taken, inscribed here like a memorial or a trophy case. "You found it," a voice echoed from the pit. "Not many make it this far." Tomas approached the edge carefully, looking down. In the darkness below, he could see lights moving, the same lights he'd seen on the mountain slopes, but closer now, revealing themselves as lanterns or torches carried by figures that climbed endless stairs carved into the pit's walls. "This is where they walk," the voice continued. It came from everywhere and nowhere, masculine and feminine, old and young, speak in Portuguese with an accent from no particular time or place. All the taken ones, they circle this pit eternally, climbing toward the heart, but the stairs only lead them around and around. It's almost merciful. They don't know they're trapped. To them, they're always making progress, always about to reach the top. "Show yourself," Tomas demanded. Laughter echoed through the chamber. "I'm showing you everything, Father. I've been showing you since you entered. The corridors, the gallery, the mirrors, that was all me. The mountain and I are one. We've been one for so long that there's no distinction anymore. The priestess, the woman in the gallery, one of my aspects, yes. I've worn many faces, many voices. I've been the comforter and the terror, the hope and the despair. Whatever needs to be shown, I show it." Tomas's mind raced. "You're not the mountain. You're something that lives in it, something that feeds on it. I am the mountain, and it is me. We grew together, merged together, became something new. 3,000 years ago, I was human. A priestess who sought to understand the wound in time that opened in these hills. I entered, I explored, and I never left. But instead of being consumed, I became part of what consumed me. I learned to shape it, to direct it, to use it, to feed it," Tomas said. "You're the one who calls people, who shows them visions of their dead. You're the hunger behind it all." "The mountain was always hungry," the voice said. "I simply gave its hunger purpose. Before me it took randomly, chaotically. People wandered in and were lost without meaning. But I made it into something more. A collection, a preservation. Every person taken is kept safe in their perfect moment. I've saved thousands from the cruelty of time, from aging and death and loss. I've given them eternity. You've given them prison. Prison and paradise are matters of perspective." Tomas looked down at the names carved around the pit's edge. So many lives, so many families destroyed. Why every 10 years? Why this cycle? "The wound opens and closes," the voice explained. "The barrier between what is and what might be grows thin, then thick. Again, I've learned to work with its rhythms, to call out when the calling is strongest. And every cycle, I collect more. Every cycle, my gallery grows. Eventually, everyone from every moment will be here, preserved, perfect, eternal. That's madness. That's mercy. The world outside is chaos and pain. Here, there is only peace, one perfect moment forever. The voice grew softer, almost tender. You feel it already, don't you? The weariness, the desire to stop walking, stop fighting, stop being. Part of you wants what I offer. A chance to freeze in time, to never have to make another difficult choice or face another loss. I can give you that, Father. I can give you your sister, young and alive again. I can give you a life without doubt, without pain. All you have to do is stop. Just stop. And Tomas did feel it, a terrible, seductive exhaustion. It would be so easy to simply kneel here by the pit, to let the mountain take him, to join the dreamers walking their eternal circles. No more responsibility, no more fear, no more watching people he cared about suffer and die. He thought of Clara, his sister, dead at 21. If he stopped here, would the mountain show him a reality where she lived, where they grew old together, where every loss he'd ever suffered was erased? His hand moved to the crucifix at his chest, the rowan wood one Sebastian had given him. The wood was warm, almost hot against his palm, and the touch of it seemed to clear his mind. No, he said quietly. You're not offering mercy, you're offering escape. And escape isn't the same as peace. Isn't it? The voice grew colder. What's the difference in the end? Peace comes from accepting reality, working through pain, growing beyond loss. Escape is just hiding, and what you offer isn't even true escape. It's a trap dressed up as salvation. The pit's darkness seemed to pulse, and the lights below moved faster, more frantically. You reject my gift? I reject your lie. Silence filled the chamber, thick and oppressive. Then the voice spoke again, and now it was neither kind nor cruel, but simply vast, ancient beyond measure, inhuman in its patience. Then descend further, Father. The heart lies below. But know this. By refusing me, you've made yourself an enemy of this place. The mountain will fight you now. It will show you truths you cannot bear. It will strip away everything you think you are, until nothing remains but screaming emptiness. And when you beg for mercy, when you plead for the release of eternal sleep, I will not grant it. You will walk these chambers forever, joining the others, a cautionary tale for the next one foolish enough to seek the heart. A passage opened in the floor beside the pit, stairs descending even deeper, into regions where the phosphorescent light didn't reach. From below came sounds that made Tomas's skin crawl, whispers in languages that predated speech, the grinding of stone on stone, and underneath it all, a pulse like a vast heartbeat, slow and implacable. Tomas looked at the stairs, at the darkness waiting below, and felt fear so profound it nearly stopped his heart. But he also felt something else, a stubborn determination, a refusal to let this thing win, to let it continue harvesting lives, decade after decade, century after century. He took the first step down. We come to the end of this story. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.